I remember feeling like I was drowning. You know, when you're new to a situation, you haven't built the rails on how to assign what importance you would to information. And I've always been an entrepreneurial person, like internally, not necessarily like starting businesses, but I'm a builder. And it's ironic because you don't kind of see builders as creators, but I identify problems and I'm like, it can be different. Operators are very execution focused, and sometimes waiting is a strategy because it allows you actually execute better. One of the things I loved about consulting was the fact that I could do many different things. It has breadth. Occasionally it will give you depth. But then 3 years in, they're like, oh, you're on partner track, you're doing very well. I was looking and I said, I don't think I want to be a partner. But this taught me something in retrospect, that you know what you want. Even if you don't know what you want, you know what you don't want. And even if I don't know exactly yet, I trade towards finding it.
Welcome to The Startup Leap, the #1 podcast interviewing startup founders who have taken the leap into starting their own businesses.
Here on The Startup Leap, we hear real, raw, and relatable stories of these entrepreneurs, how they've navigated taking the leap, and the decisions they've made. We're your hosts.
I'm Yvonne.
And I'm Maria.
And this is the Startup Leap podcast.
Yvonne and Maria are partners at Local Globe and Openseed VC, respectively. Local Globe and Openseed are independent of the Startup Leap podcast. Any statements made by Maria, Yvonne, or the Startup Leap guests are solely their view and are not advice. Endorsements by the Startup Leap, its guests, Maria and Yvonne.
So Maria, one-liner. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Ooh, okay. So, hi, I'm Maria. I'm an operator turned investor. The better part of the first decade of my career was spent scaling startups. I had a stint in consulting. I spent some time at Uber as the country manager, and then also led a fintech startup called Branch, which is a neobank. It's kind of like a Monzo for emerging markets. It's San Francisco headquartered and has offices across the world. So I led a local office in Nigeria for about 3 years, also on the leadership team as well. And after that, I did my MBA at Oxford, where I led the Oxford Seed Fund as the managing director. The Oxford Seed Fund is very unique in the sense that at the time I was there, the students had autonomy on the investments we made. And then also, I think it's now the largest student-led fund in Europe, actually, in terms of size, okay. Yes. And then after that, I spent some time at Octopus Ventures. Octopus Ventures was setting up its first pre-seed fund, and my colleague Kirsten had joined just before, for a while actually, and then I joined after, and we built out the fund together. I was there for 2 years, after which I left, which is now 8 months ago, to set up Openseed, which is my own fund that focuses on a very specific founder profile. Operators, experienced operators starting their technology companies. So the entire thesis with Openseed is that the early stage is fragmented. We're going to have a lot of experienced operators start their technology companies, and they're going to need capital and a network of operators, people who are actual software engineers, product managers, supporting them from start to launch. So that's the entire thesis of Openseed. So yeah, that's how I describe myself.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a bit more about who was Maria growing up. Tell us about your childhood. What were the experiences, moments that shaped you to be who you are today?
I think a few things. Growing up, the one thing I remember was being very, very curious. And my dad really fanned the flame of that curiosity. I would say that I grew up surrounded by a lot of books. I read a lot because my dad read a lot. So we had a lot of books. Yes. And I just really, even till today, books are where I can really disappear. And it's fiction, non-fiction, anything that stimulates my mind. So I was a very curious child. I was also one of those kids that kind of just went through school very quickly. I think I finished primary school when I was like 8.
Wow.
So I was very young. I remember...
And this was in Nigeria?
It was in Nigeria. Okay. I remember being one of the youngest in my class, if not the youngest, by a huge margin every single time.
And how did that shape you, being the youngest amongst older peers?
I don't know.
They're ahead in their journey. I'd love to hear a bit more about whether that's had an impact on who you are today.
I would say that maybe I'm a bit more comfortable with being different. And I just noticed that, in most places I went to growing up, I was different. I was either younger or maybe a bit more bold, or I just accepted the fact that, okay, you're different. This is your journey. So I think that maybe shaped me a little bit. And also the fact that I'm quite comfortable not being being the youngest in a space. I don't see it as a thing. So maybe over time that kind of made me comfortable in places where I might be younger.
And so you finished primary school, and then tell us what the experience was like in Nigeria, going to secondary and then university.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I think my transition into secondary school was interesting because I was quite young. There were no restrictions in age then. I think they're beginning to put some things in there now. I also remember being 8 and 9 and being very obsessed with computers. Just picture this, like a Nigerian 8-year-old girl with a desktop. Like then it wasn't laptops. It was like you literally needed to plug the monitor,
I remember those days,
to the CPU and like the USB that had a ball in it, and then it was just a different setup. So I really spent a lot of time with computers. I played a lot of games. I would play Commandos. I remember Half-Life, Monster Truck. Those were Microsoft, like Mortal Kombat. Like I played a lot of games, and then the internet came about, and this was in the era of dial-up. Might be dating myself a little bit, but I remember those times the internet came through your local like telephone providers, and
you'd have to dial up.
Exactly. And I was just very fascinated. I was very fascinated by internet and computers. And I remember then, just on the same thread of just that curiosity, I would spend, even my dad says this still today, that I would spend hours and hours on the computer. I would spend hours on Encarta Encyclopedia. I don't know if you remember it, but it's like, it felt like the little internet on a disc at the time. I would like research stuff. I just loved to learn. I still love to learn still today. So I think that carried me all the way into university, but I also felt quite misunderstood because I think the conversations that were happening in class were such a stark reality to the conversations the things I was seeing online or on the internet so the only person who really stimulated my curiosity was my dad at home. So we would have those, elevated philosophical conversations, but at school it was just books and school, and I would just hack my way through it. Didn't quite study much, but somehow I passed, so that worked. So I would say that really shaped my journey through secondary school. And I think in Nigeria you have to choose if it's like arts or science or something like that. So I chose science. That was natural because I already loved computers. I was very inquisitive. My dad was like, you should go to science class.
So it sounds like your dad was like very influential on your childhood.
He is.
Who else is also, would you say was very influential in terms of that initial period of going from primary, secondary?
Yeah. I would say my mom as well, but in a very different way. My mom was very entrepreneurial. We lost her when I was about 16. And I think that entrepreneurial nature is just very bold. My mom could talk to anyone. I think there were some times that, me even being like we were like 5-6-year-old, I would see my mom like talking to someone and she was like very fierce. So I think I took that from her because I think I found my voice over time. And also, I think her death also impacted me because...
How old were you?
I was 16, if I remember. And I think I was in first year in university. I think I was in first year.
How did you navigate that? Because I think that when you're so young, 16, very young, you're the oldest?
Yeah, I'm the first of four.
Of how many? Of four.
Yeah.
And so I guess you would have had to take on more responsibility. Yeah. How do you think that shaped you? Oftentimes, I think grief could be one of those things that really make you reflect on life and what you want to achieve. So how did that shape who you are today?
It did. I consider that period a really huge cornerstone in my life because, one, I was a teenager. If you know anything about like teenagers, our senses are very heightened. You're in a place of self-discovery. So to have something that devastating happen to you can force a way of thinking. And for me, it really made me question everything. I grew up in a Catholic home, so there was the tenet of religion. I was very curious. Even within the religion, I would ask questions I probably know you shouldn't be asking, or even adults don't quite have answers to.
Was you one of those kids in church that were like, why this, why that?
There was one time I was like, well, if Adam named all the animals, did he name all the animals in all the languages? Because they're quite different, which is a legitimate question. Because I would ask like these random questions. Adults would just be like, I'm sorry, like, what? Anyway, so that really shaped me because that was devastating. I'd never faced death in my life. Maybe my grandma, but it was quite removed. She was older. I was different. And being the first daughter, especially coming from an African home, I'm Nigerian, born and raised. And there's a lot in the culture that puts a lot of responsibility on the first daughter. So I definitely felt that. I've always felt that responsibility, but it was definitely heightened when I lost my mom. It also made me like question everything. There is something death of a close family member does to you. It tells you how instantaneous your life like they can change, how random stuff is. You're like why did this happen? And you don't have an answer. It just happened. It's no one's fault. Like you couldn't have done anything. And I think that just made me realize how transient life is. I took that experience after going through my own journey. I questioned everything. That was the part. During that time, I dropped religion. I was like, I'm not going to believe anything that I don't choose myself in my life. This is like a 16-year-old. And I went through my own journey, like learning, reading, thinking, reflecting. I consider myself like a very reflective person, even though I can come off as extroverted as well. So that happened during that phase in my life and made me realize that, look, every day is a gift. If you're going to live, you will live boldly, you'd live deliberately, you'd live urgently, because nothing is guaranteed. Anything can happen. And obviously you don't live life like recklessly. It's actually reinforces why you have to be very deliberate in life.
Yeah, and very intentional. And I can definitely relate to that. My father passed away 5 years ago now. And what it did for me was create this sense of urgency. So that happened when you were 16. Then you were in secondary school?
No, uni. University. Yeah, 100 left. The first year of uni, I was 16.
Okay, so tell us about your university experience.
Yeah.
What did you major in?
Yeah.
Sounds like you're a bit of a computer enthusiast.
It was the logical thing. The only other option was maybe accounting, and that would have been definitely the influence of my father, because my dad is a chartered accountant and he tries to convert everyone he can. He's like, you should study accounting. I'm like, Daddy, accounting is not the only thing. But
well, I mean, Nigerian parents usually think there's like a few vocations, right? You could be a doctor, a lawyer, accountant. So.
Exactly. And there's this thing where parents love to get their kids to do similar things they did. But either way, so computer science was a logical choice because I loved computers. I was a natural with computers. And it just seemed logical at the time. So I chose computer science for my undergrad. And that was 4 years. I was at a private school in Nigeria. The dynamics in Nigeria with universities, that they're public schools and they're private schools, I wouldn't say anyone is better than the other per se in terms of quality of teaching, but the private schools, you can at least be sure that you would do your 4 years without any strikes or stuff like that. So it was a new school at the time. Covenant University also had like a bit of a religious undertone as well, but it is a good school. I think a lot of the outputs of the school tend to do very well. So yeah, I was in uni 4 years, computer science. I think one thing that I enjoyed during that experience was just building friendships that till today are still my close circle. Like we know each other. Most of my close friends are all computer science grads, and all of us have gone to do very interesting, different things. And in school, then one of the things that I loved about my school experience was you could experiment with your friends. Like we would be in the room, like coding or trying to solve like a problem, or studying together, doing assignments together. I loved computer science in the sense that you could think of something, you could build it, and you could see it work. And I love that iteration of thoughts, working on it, like trying to debug, like, and then all of a sudden it works and then you're happy. I really love that iteration.
So you went to university, studied computer science. What comes next? What did you do after university, and how did you decide what to do? Yeah,
so it's very interesting. I remember then, this was 2010, and the world then tech was still very nascent. In fact, the people who won were the almost like the network engineers. Right. It was very hardware oriented. Software was still in its early stages. So, I mean, whilst I enjoyed computer science, like I kind of knew in my heart that was not what I wanted to do. It was a challenge that I overcame, and I enjoyed that I was able to do that. And I loved that it challenged me, but I was like, no, I wanted to do something with a bit more breadth. And I remember always having this thing in my mind, like even as early as like I would say like 9 or 8, because I remember a memory of when I was much younger. My mom had a shop, like a mom and pop shop, and I remember my dad once said, "Oh, your mom is because she was going to work with my grandma who had a restaurant," and he was like, "So Maria, you're in charge now. You're the boss of this business. You have to take care of it."
This is your first stint in entrepreneurship,
literally. And I remember then I was just like, "Whoa."
How old were you then?
I was like 8. I was maybe like 6. He was. I think my dad was very. He's a very wise
Age
man.
is just a number.
Yeah, he made me see, like, in my mind, I was like, so I own this shop. He was like, but it's a huge responsibility.
It must have created that belief in you from very early that you can do whatever you put your mind to.
My dad never limited me in terms of my age, my gender. That was not a thing. If I said I wanted to go to the moon, my dad would say, so what's next? Like, he always supports me. And that's one of the things that I believe really contributes to the sense of, I guess, belief that I have in myself. So yeah, remember that. So I think the line essentially is, I've always felt like I wanted to understand how businesses work. It's weird. That has always been a thing recurring in my mind for the longest time. And it shaped how I approached my career, actually. So during, after university, there's this 1-year mandatory thing we have to do in Nigeria called the NYSC. So I did that. And I did that away from like where I grew up in Nigeria. I spent some time at a bank. I spent some time at a tech consulting company that built software and hardware solutions for like the government. So it was very interesting. And then after that, it was like, what's next? And this is the dynamic, I think, that was interesting at the time, because then the dynamic in Nigeria, what you find is that a lot of people come out into the workforce, but there's not enough jobs to insulate them. So imagine this, like, kid that kind of goes quickly through classes, 8 years old. I'm like done with, like, you have that innate belief that I am special, like anyone should want me. All of that was like broken down, and I'm glad in retrospect that it did, because that then forced me to have a growth mindset. Because I think when I was done, I was like, okay, it would either be consulting was the in thing then, and then it was like oil companies, which now I'm just like, how times change. That was the thing. It was either you were at like Shell, Schlumberger, like Cisco as like a network engineer, or like you were in consulting. Consulting was still coming, and it was the big fours, it was the KPMGs, EYs, was McKinsey a thing then? Yeah, McKinsey a little bit. So yeah, it was consulting, and then the application started, and I would hear, unfortunately.
So is this before or after you did the national service?
After the national service.
Okay. What did you do for national service? Sorry, just want to take a step back and understand.
So it was 2 things.
What
So
that
I
was.
worked at a bank in Abuja, and then I worked at a tech company, like a tech consulting company that worked for governments to deploy software and hardware solutions. So yeah.
And so you were deploying that to public sector as opposed to
but I was just fresh off school. My contribution was maybe like building out the help section of the app, so that place that you kind of go to, like designing that so the devs can do that. And then in the bank, it was just regular banking stuff. But I usually used to be at all this places in the tech department, like the IT department. So I'll probably be managing the Microsoft servers like Exchange, Active Directory, which is what used to be the thing before cloud came later on. So yeah, that was after university. And then there was that stint where I was applying. And then I was like, you know what? While I'm waiting and, applying, my dad, I in the house, there would always be like books, and there were these accounting books, and I would read them, and my dad was like, you could actually just explore taking, the ACCA.
And he must have loved. He was like,
and he could see
follow the same path that I did.
And I also feel like at the end of the day, even if I didn't want to do that, if he saw that I had interest, wherever I saw interest, he tended to like foster it, which was very good in retrospect. So I was like, okay, I'll look at it, and then I looked at the first few books, and I actually enjoyed like reading it. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I've always wanted to know how businesses work. Maybe this is like my in. And then I started reading the books. Then I started taking the exams. And then during that process, I got a job at a bank at the IT department. So I was an IT administrator at the bank, but I continued doing that.
Okay.
So yeah, that was like post NYC 1 or 2 years after.
Cool. And so then you went on to work in consultancy.
Yes, I worked in consulting.
And so you got the exposure to work with companies as you had desired. Tell us a bit more about that experience.
Yeah, I think I was in consulting for 3 years. I was at Deloitte. I worked with an incredible group of people. One of the things I loved about consulting was the fact that I could do many different things. It has breadth.
Yeah.
Occasionally will give you depth. And I did projects like working with banks to figure out their customer experience. There was one project that I worked on that was just like a project you don't have twice in your life. It's like a business transformation for a newspaper. And I got to see the process within like a newspaper from end to end, from like editorial all the way to distribution. Those are like 4 different businesses in one. I think like the digital transformation has kind of like streamlined these competencies with digital distribution. Anyway, so I mostly worked for financial services, some government work, and then there were businesses like the newspaper. So that was nice. I did that for 3 years. I was in strategy consulting, did some tech. But then 3 years in, I was like, it's so funny because like, they're like, oh, you're on partner track. You're doing very well. I was looking and I said, I don't think I want to be a partner. And it's so, but this taught me something in retrospect that you know what you want. Even if you don't know what you want, you know what you don't want. And I think you have to trust that because,
What was it that gave you that confidence to make that leap from being in a position where you could have stayed on, become a partner, and then actually thinking, no, actually, I want more for myself?
Yeah, I think, I don't know.
Is there anything that you think influenced you having that confidence to step out?
I think in my mind, I have a clarity, an internal clarity of what I don't want.
Right.
And what I want. And even if I don't know exactly yet, I trade towards finding it. And I believe that it is there, even when in the moment I might not have the range. So I think then I was just like, if I simulate myself as a partner, I don't like how it feels. And I look at the partners and they're great at their jobs. They're incredible people. But I was like, is it for me? And I've always had that in my mind that you don't live a happy life by being miserable when everyone else is happy for you. So I do need to, being authentic to my own life is very important to me. And I think it draws a straight line to living a very urgent, deliberate life. Yeah. Because I'm like, we're not going to get a second go. Like, even if we do, like, whatever you believe, it's probably a completely different experience. You're probably a completely different person. But if I'm going to do this, then I have to do it. It has to be something that I know that I want. I know that is for me. I know that I can bring my full self to. So I already started sensing a bit of that. So I started exploring other things. And then a recruiter reached out and was like, oh, Uber is hiring an operations director. And I was like, hell yeah.
But at that time, Uber must have been quite early in the journey, particularly on the continent, in Nigeria.
Because Uber started, I think, in 2009, 2010. And in Nigeria, I think Uber got in 2012, maybe, or 14. I can't remember. But this was 2016. So Uber was not a new company. It was like 5-6 years in, but it was new in the sense of the fact that I was going to emerging markets and starting to expand. So I joined. At the time, there was a general manager there already. So I worked with the team alongside other team. It was just mind blowing.
So what exactly were you doing at Uber?
So I joined in as an operations manager and then I left as a country manager. And it was a very rapid, but it felt long. Like a lot of things happened during that time. So when I joined as an operations manager, my role was mostly managing like the supply side. So you kind of think of demand as the customer demand, but then supply is the drivers. It's like making sure that the rides are reliable. So designing incentives in geos, like centers, to making sure that there's enough supply when there's spike in demand in different places. And then also like managing like partnerships and interacting with folks locally who can improve the driver experience. So that was a lot of my role. And then shortly after I became the country manager, the general manager at the time left, and then I became the country manager. My role expanded. So it was insane. I have memories.
That must have been a steep learning curve.
I mean, it was steep in the sense that it is a completely unmatched experience to be chatting to drivers about a 50% price cut.
Right.
And you being the face of that as a country manager, or just having a brand that people love but viscerally also reacts so strongly to, and being the face locally, or navigating local regulations with being the point person as the country manager. So it was very intense, but I thrived. Like I think I learned what I could learn. I saw it as a unique experience. Many things from Uber I still take into my journey today, both things I should do, and things that I probably should not do as a business. But I think it was a transformative experience overall.
Just curious, how did you navigate going from a corporate to working at Uber, scrappy startup? How big was the team at the time?
Yeah, the team was actually quite small. I think maybe like 8 people on the core team, but then we had like a broader team that did customer support. And I think
because I guess like at the corporate you would have that infrastructure,
and consulting,
and then you go to a startup where actually you have to figure things out on your own and be scrappy, figure things out. So how did you navigate that?
I remember this. It was hard. I remember feeling like I was drowning because it was like, when you're new to a situation, you haven't built the rails on how to assign what importance you would to information. So if there's a barrage of information, you feel like, this is important, this is important. So that's how I felt. But I remember after a while, I settled in. And in my mind, I took that as one of the lessons in my life, that just because you struggle at something or you're overwhelmed with something in the beginning doesn't mean that you're bad at it. You just need time. You're learning. It's new. You're building the rails. If you were to think of an AI model, when ChatGPT first came out, there are some things it was saying that you're probably hallucinating.
I think that is so important. You have to be patient on yourself, because in anything you do in life, you're not going to be the expert.
There's a learning curve.
You have to be patient on yourself as you're on that learning curve.
Yeah.
In order for you to get to a place where you're like, okay, I can do this.
And you have to also trust yourself that because you don't know it yet doesn't mean you can't know it. You can learn it. And I think that's the growth mindset thing that I eventually learned in my life that has been such a gift.
But having that self-awareness as well is also really key. Understanding what you know and what you don't know.
I agree. And then also another thing that I learned through that experience, even like as you're transitioning into a new place, is just whenever you join a team, like, listen, like,
don't come in and try and shake things up from the get-go.
Like, just listen, just take your time to understand the dynamics, because there's context that exists even before you came that will affect you if you aren't aware of it. So like from that experience, I remember anywhere since then that I moved to or joined, I would just spend the initial time just paying attention, asking questions, just trying to understand the dynamics before I try to do anything. So that was another lesson that I learned there. But I would say like the number one lesson is, just because it's difficult at the start doesn't mean you're crap at it. It means you're learning. You're struggling because you're learning. Because if you're not struggling, like, how does your brain know the new things to adapt? So I think that was another thing. So it was an incredible experience. During that time, I learned a lot.
How long were you at Uber for before you left to branch? Okay, so tell us about that jump from Uber to branch.
That was very random in the sense that I was going to be at Uber, and then I got a message from a recruiter who was recruiting for a role for branch in Nigeria. And at the time I was just like, branch, I don't know what company that is. And then I searched online and I was like, oh, they're like a digital bank. They are trying to do to financial services what Uber in a sense did to transport. And I had strong opinions about digital banks at the time, because whilst I was in consulting, I consulted for banks, and a lot of them wanted to be digital.
The incumbent banks was this,
Yeah, and a lot of them wanted to be digital, but it was very clear that the incentives were not right, because if you think about the banking, I guess the traditional banking sector, retail banking wasn't really a thing. Most banks made their money off just corporate clients, corporate lending, sometimes even investments in securities like treasury bills that had high yields, but like low risk, which is an anomaly. But anyways, the TLDR really was that the idea of disrupting the industry was very appealing to me. And then I spoke with the founder, Matt Flannery, who's an incredible person. And I saw his vision. He had built something prior, which was called Kiva, which is actually an NGO platform that gave loans to smallholder farmers in Africa, and kind of connected lenders on the other side of the world. And I saw his vision, and I could see it. My time at Deloitte had like prepared me with the banks. I understood the financial services sector sufficiently enough, and then I joined the team, and it was incredible. I worked with incredible people. Andrew, who launched the market in Branch, who I worked closely with before he went to launch the next market. There were Sarah, who led people at branch, Dan, who was the CTO. It was a lovely place to work. And then I was charged with building out the team, building out the processes, leading local strategy, managing regulations, all of that fun stuff. Some of the heuristics I learned at Uber, some I had built before, all of that came together. And it was an incredible 3 years.
Cool. What were your key learnings from Branch?
Oh, I think if you want to build a deliberate culture within an organization, you have to start earlier than you think you need to start.
I think that it's so key, particularly when you're looking at like building out diverse teams, or because the culture gets set very early. And if you don't make those changes and be very deliberate from the beginning, it becomes so much harder to do it later.
It does. I like to say it's like a virus. It spreads faster than you think it does. And you can't, it's hard to unwind. Because I did a lot of like strategy projects at Deloitte as well, where, you know, you had established companies saying we wanted to revamp our strategy, and it's like, oof, that's gonna be tough, because it's like already set in the nuance of the things you don't say within your organization. So yeah, I think that was one lesson that I learned. And then the other thing was just that ultimately you can't build anything alone. It's like the quality of your team that decides the quality of what you build.
Did you build out that team in Nigeria?
Yeah.
So tell us some of the things that you took into consideration as you're building out your team.
Yeah, I had the benefit of having like the backdrop of the global branch, but ultimately for me, the things I optimize for: curiosity, bias for action. And I think that at the early stages, like that hunger, at the early stages, you need someone who has, would I say, they express themselves through their work. They do good work. They have a standard that is beyond you and what you enforce. They have a bias for action, because there are people that are kind of more analytics inclined. And for some roles, they can be very good. But at the early stages of a startup, you want people who can move quickly, who can learn, who can iterate, who can rapidly adapt. I think that was what we optimized for initially. And then you grow into the business, it gets to a point where you then need to hire certain specialists to do specialist things. So for example, the more and more we got regulated, we needed to hire a legal and compliance person. But I think ultimately, you want people who learn, because then they elevate the bar of the company as a whole, and all of you are just elevating. The other thing I would say is that as a leader, a lot of what you say is not as important as what you do. Like, and what you don't do. So I was very deliberate both ways. There's some things I would I would just be like, you do this, whether or not you say this a million times, you doing it has sent an even stronger message. So I feel like as a founder, as a leader, you need to realize that a lot of who you are gets imprinted onto your team, and you need to make sure you're imprinting the good parts. Because whether or not you are aware of it, you are communicating even when you're not saying a thing. So I think being very deliberate about that, those were the things that I learned, aside from like the nuance of like running a regulated fintech, which is a completely different conversation.
Talk to us a bit about the regulatory piece, because anyone who knows Nigeria knows that the regulation doesn't come by easy. So tell us a bit about your experience, and I guess for startups that are thinking about regulation, how they should approach it. Any nuggets that you would share from that particular perspective?
Oh, I feel like, do we have enough time? The TLDR, I would say, is it will take 3 times as long as you think, and it will be 3 times more expensive, and it will probably be 3 times more confusing. It won't be as clear, because navigating, especially in an emerging technology where the regulation is playing catch up, means that the regulators don't even have a playbook for what it should look like, and they're still learning. So as a business, especially as someone who's trying to disrupt incumbents, you're probably going to need to partner with them to start. That's the irony, because they have the licenses. And then as you go, there is a lot of nuance in terms of the competencies you need to build within your organization to balance that radical curiosity and innovation that the industry really needs with the regulatory compliance that has enabled it be stable to stay for as long as it has. So I think that nuance is what is very critical. So yeah, when it comes to regulations, there's no silver bullet.
Yeah, there's no way around it.
There's no, but you go through it, you navigate it, you try to have conversations with regulators, you share your point of view, you try to understand where they're coming from, perhaps you find a middle ground, but at the end of the day, balancing that customer love, that true product, customer obsession, with just making sure that you and the regulators can find a world where you can still do that while...
And that can be a moat as well, right?
It can.
Yeah.
It really can, especially over time.
Cool. So in hindsight, looking back at your experience at Branch and Uber, is there anything as an operator that you would look back on and maybe do a bit different in hindsight?
Differently, I would say, like I said, I think at Uber, I would say, like, as an operator, if you're joining another role, just spending time to know the new team and the new industry before you jump in, especially for people, because operators are very execution focused, and sometimes waiting is a strategy. Sometimes waiting is much more impactful for a period, because it allows you actually execute better. So that's one. And then on the Branch side, I would say, like, in retrospect, I would say, like, there was a time it's a good problem to have in retrospect, but I would say, like, you want to balance hiring not too early, but then hiring not too late. Because they both have their, would I say, nuances. You definitely want to hire when things feel stretched, but there's also a time gap to hiring. And you don't want to, because it takes about 3 months to hire, because they have a notice period. In fact, maybe like 4 or 5, because you need to hire them, and then they have a 3 months notice period. So it will take longer than you think. And I think that sometimes that timing can be hard. Because I remember one time, all I was doing was hiring. And it's normal with any business, especially as you're growing and scaling. And you need to be very careful who you hire. So we did very well with that. We didn't rush any decisions. I remember, like, the culture that I created was, I got lots of feedback from the team that it was positive. And I think it continues to exist like that today.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I think, like, if I look at all the CEOs I work with, those that do a really great job hiring are constantly hiring. They're always on the lookout for great talent, because oftentimes, because great talent oftentimes are not going to be out of a role. Yeah. They are going to be in some roles, and so you just have to continuously get to know people and build those relationships. So Branch is done. You were there for 3 years. Yeah. Then you decided to do your MBA.
Yeah, I decided.
Why did you decide to take the leap and do the MBA?
Because, like, I'm one of those people that actually, like, really used to chat terribly about the MBA. I just like confess, because it's possible that you might have caught me in a conversation many years ago saying something like, oh, MBAs are just like brand degrees. Like, no one's going to teach you how to run a business. Like, I was a little like... Yeah, I had strong opinions, but in retrospect, it eventually became something that was very critical in my journey. 3 years into Branch, I remember having a conversation with my boss at the time, then Matt, and I was like, hey, Matt, I'm thinking about an MBA. I was like, you don't need an MBA. I was like, I know. I was like, but I think there's something out there. I'd done it 10 years in my career. I was like, I do suspect that there's something out there in terms of either being an operator or building a startup of my own. I've always been an entrepreneurial person, like internally, not necessarily like starting businesses, but I'm a builder. Like I create things. And it's ironic because you don't kind of see builders as creators, but I literally, in my mind, I identify problems and I'm like, it can be different. What does that look like? And going through that process of creating it is very rewarding for me. So with Matt, I had the conversation. I was like, okay, let's see. Like, so kind of did the application and got a scholarship. And I was like, okay, that's about a sign as any. Now I have to do it. But in my mind, why I really did it was I needed a year away from the grind. I needed a year to figure out like what the next decade looked like for me professionally, that I was utilizing all my strengths, all my experiences, and that I was also growing and being challenged. And that was the MBA for me. It was supposed to be a space where I was able to experiment and decide what I wanted to do. And I remember before I joined, did the MBA, there was a book I read. It's called Design Your Life. And it had the entire thesis that your passion is not one thing and that you create things that are suited to who you are. You know, that whole ikigai thing. And you can create that. Sometimes it doesn't come pre-planned. So going into the MBA, my thinking was, okay, I either start a business that I quite like I think that I could stay and build for a long time. It was also VC had started coming in, mostly because I'd done an angel investment, but then also my friends would, chat to me about diligence, it's tech startups. I would like share long thoughts, and they're like, I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing. And I'd also been involved in investing, mostly from the investee perspective with like Branch. Even during my time at Branch, although that was more debt instead of equity, I raised a $10 million commercial paper for the business because we're a neobank. We need to finance the loan book. So I'd already started getting into that, but I think the MBA was supposed to be a place where I explored and decided what the next decade in quote would be.
Cool. And so tell us about your experience through the MBA. How did you navigate, how did it help you where you are today as an investor?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
That's a good question, because two things happened during that time. And that was the COVID year, by the way. So two things happened during that time.
You mentioned you did an angel investment. Yes. So that was while you were at Branch?
No. Yeah, while I was at Branch. Okay. Yeah.
How did that do? Because I always say the first investments are not always great. And oftentimes you learn from your losses, actually. So.
To be honest, it was a true angel investment in the sense that I invested and I didn't think about, I was just like, I want to help this business and I want to help it grow, and I can, and I, put money in. And it went well. I do think the founder is incredible. And I think the founder will build again. And I'm looking forward to the next thing that she decides to build. So that was that. And then on the MBA side, sorry, what was the question? What was the question again?
How did the MBA help you shape your decision to become an investor?
That's a good question. So when I joined, because I did my MBA at Oxford, and Oxford has an incredible seed fund.
So that would have been the first time living outside of Nigeria?
Yes. That was the first time living outside. But I worked at international tech companies. I traveled quite a ton, traveled for holidays, had family outside of the country. My husband and I traveled a lot. He was my boyfriend at the time. Actually, no, we were married, so we did travel a lot. That was there, and then I moved to the UK, and then we did the MBA together, and my husband and I also did the MBA together.
I love that.
It was very interesting because I think Oxford, because we did a few applications, I think Oxford was the one we didn't declare that we were, so they could have assumed we were siblings or something because of the same surname, but we did the MBA together. But I think from an investment standpoint,
we're going to come back to that, by the way. But yeah.
The Oxford Seed Fund was very helpful because it was one program where the students actually had autonomy. Mm-hmm. I don't think any program does that in Europe till today. Also, we had an incredible group of advisors, of people who were embedded in the European tech ecosystem. And then you get plugged into this very exciting entrepreneurial network that is Oxford's broader entrepreneurial network. So that was interesting. The other thing that happened during that time was also, I had sent a cold email to a GP of a fund in the US who was, I think, on their fund 1 or 2. I actually think it might have been fund 1 at the time. And she wrote a lot of content, and you might know her, Elizabeth Yin. I talk about her all the time. I'm a huge fan of the Hustle Fund team. I love how authentic they are, how unique they are, how insanely competent and capable they are. And I had sent a cold email. I was like, hey, I'm about to start my MBA. VC is one path I'm kind of thinking about. I would love to get on a call and chat. And in the barrage of emails, she was kind enough to speak with me.
Cold emails work.
They do.
I think prime example that cold emails work.
Mine worked. I think it was very short. It was something like, hi, I'm Maria. I love your content on blah, 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 specific. I'm about to do my, start my MBA at Oxford. VC is one of the paths that I'm considering. I would love to chat if you have like a short 20 minutes or something like that.
So perfect example, shoot your shot, because you just never know.
Honestly, shoot it.
I'm
just like, do you know how many emails I've not gotten responses to? There are some right now. I'm still waiting for responses. So I'm always like, I don't mind, sharing, because I really think that the worst you get is a no.
Exactly.
And no is not a bad thing.
Yeah. It's not the end of the world.
It's worse. Yeah. Because then you'd never know. She responded, and then we got on a call, and I chatted through what I was thinking about. She chatted through how she, a few things to consider from like the VC perspective. And then she was like, you know what, if you want to, she was like, what do you want? And I remember saying like, I just want to see deals. I'm an operator, yes. I've scaled startups, but I need to build my heuristic on what a good investment looks like. And I can't do that without volume.
Right.
And she was like, okay, you should chat to my co-founder. Then I chatted with Eric. Great guy. I still have like conversations with Eric till today. He's like my therapist at this point. When I'm fundraising, he's like, how are you doing, Maria? I'm like, Eric, he's great. And then I had a chance, like, these are just cool people. And then Eric is like, you should have a conversation with Sheehan. And then I had a conversation. I was like, oh my God, Sheehan is amazing. Like, she's like an ops genius. Like, she's incredible. And I was like, this is such a good crew. And they're like, look, if you want to spend time, with us reviewing deals, we could give that. We see around 1,000 deals a month. I was like, okay, that's volume.
That would definitely help you build your heuristics.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was also across like many different geos. So it was US, Africa, Latin, Southeast Asia. So I could think of it in the context of different markets. Anyways, so I remember then it was, I think, about July 2020. And then I was like, I had applied to being, so that's one thread. I had applied to being the managing director of the Oxford Seed Fund during my MBA. And I remember applying, and there were like 3 roles. I think it was 2. It was either you applied to be like the managing director, or you applied to be the operations director or something like that. I don't know why I chose the operations director. I just saw it. I saw the managing director. I was like, I just chose the operations director. And then after I applied, I was like, why did you choose the operations? Like, why didn't you choose the managing director role? I was like, I don't know. Am I experienced enough? It's like, you've scaled startups. Like, the entire point of the role is like, I was like, and then I sat down and I spoke to him. I was like, I spoke to Jay, my husband. I was like, I have just applied for like the operation. Do you think I should apply for the? He was like, of course. Like, why did you apply? He's like, tell them. And then I sent an email and I was like, hi, I applied for the operations director role, but that's not the role I think I'm most suited for. I want to apply for the managing director. And they're like, okay, noted. TLDR, I got the role. And what you do with the roles, you have to recruit the team of other students, and then you lead the team to making the investments in the year. So I did that. And trust me, managing MBA students is not an easy job. But it also took a lot of my time. So I couldn't do a lot other than that. So with that in mind, on that thread, it gave me like a lot of incredible experience looking at Oxford affiliated startups, reviewing Oxford deals, being plugged into the European ecosystem. And then on the other hand, there was the Hustle Fund thing. And I eventually said, you know what, I'll do it. And then I was there for 6 months, and I reviewed like 100 deals a week, 20 deals a day. I would see a lot. I would be on calls to Elizabeth, Eric Sheehan. I would see how they would talk about investments. I learned. I was soaking that curiosity of when I was young. I was just like a sponge in water. I would review the decks. I would look at the markets. I would build heuristics. And I could see in that time my brain starting to build this network. Till today, if I hear a startup and I think of the business model, I've probably seen 1 or 2 or know their issues or have tracked them. So that really, really helped, because the thing about investing when you just start is you don't know what to think. You're like,
absolutely.
Oh, this sounds good. And then someone says, yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, it's terrible. Why? And then you're like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Or you see one and you're like, oh, this doesn't look big. They're like, oh no, that's massive. So I think like you really, that, building your heuristic really helps. So it really helped me. So that was how I made a segue into investing. So that was the Hustle Fund, Hustle Fund and Oxford Seed Fund experience.
So when you graduated from the MBA, you chose to stay in London, went on to work at Oxford, and you had the potential to stay on at Hustle Fund, right? So
yes.
How did you decide where to go?
The Hustle Fund team are incredible. To be honest, they are one of the nicest, most competent people I know. I know that we will somehow, we will continue to collaborate together. So yeah, it was either that, and there was another fund in the US that had given an offer that I could have explored doing that, but that would have required like visa and stuff like that. And then I then saw a role, and I was like, in my mind, Hustle Fund was a perfect fit. And then I saw a role here in London about someone who was setting up their first pre-seed fund. Now, because I'd already, through that experience in the MBA, and besides, during the MBA, I experimented a lot. I built like an app, bought an engineering team together.
Tell us more about that.
Like one engineer, designed the app. It was supposed to be, oh my God,
what were you doing? What was
it? It was called Mixar, Mixaar.
Okay.
And it was supposed to connect MBA students across MBA degrees. Because another thing that I found was that within MBA
Almost like
students,
a Facebook for MBA.
yeah, it's like a
students.
Bumble, because with MBA students, you never know. So it was something like that, but it was supposed to be this networking tool that lowered the barriers that existed between MBA programs, because a lot of MBA programs are very like closed. You have like LBS, you have like Stanford, you have like, but are you mixing beyond like the sports and stuff like that? But you can mix and actually increase the value of the network overall. Anyways, that was what that was supposed to do. It was a great idea, terrible product. It was consumer. I had no experience building a consumer product. Hard to monetize. But even when I remember when I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I would love to chat with like investors. They were very kind. They're like, yeah, you should explore. Yeah, experiment. See what you find. And I saw what I found, and I was like, yeah, no. And then I sat down and I was like, do I want to be building this for like 15, 20? It didn't have that meaning for me.
But I mean, you must have had so many learnings from it. And that's the great thing about starting things.
I saw like the process of building from like an idea to product on paper to like Figma to like then code and then people actually using it and testing it. And yeah, consumer products are hard, especially if you've not done consumer before. I don't recommend it. I mean, there's always incredible first-time founders, but well, kudos to you. I don't know. Consumer is tough, but they're incredibly like binary outcomes in consumer. You can build something incredible as a consumer startup. So yeah, did that. So I'd experimented with that. I'd also like still kept my mind open of like operating. I could join like a tech startup or a larger company. So I was very open-minded, but at the end of the MBA, I knew it was VC. I knew it was VC because I thought I brought a unique view to how I thought about investments. I've done 0 to 1. I've actually done go-to-market. Like I've seen that weird space where you know it's there, but the market, you're testing, you're iterating, you're experimenting, you're seeing some signals, but it's not quite clear. You're going again and again and again, and then the market pulls and you're like, okay, it's there. So I knew
the thing about being an operator, being a founder, it's so unpredictable.
It is. You don't know.
So unpredictable.
And it's like, there's also just the fact that it's not a straight line.
Yeah.
It's really, even the best founders is not a straight line because your thesis
and this is something that I really actually want to highlight, because oftentimes you see the headlines of companies having raised huge amounts of funding. Yeah. But actually, once you've raised that funding, that's where the journey begins, right? Because then you have to deliver. And it's never a straight journey. It's never, and even getting to that point of raising funding, it's never a smooth journey.
You know what I think? In fact, oftentimes when you hear of an announcement, it's probably a lagging indicator.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
It's happened probably like months ago. But then what I found is there's a lot of content that kind of goes, oh, you should do this. But all of those things are lagging indicators. Like there are first principles that you can stick to. And through dedication and like just being consistent in your experimentation, anchoring on the customer, being very clever about how you balance like the product, the customer distribution, you're really trying to get to the heart of it. Quite naturally, the success will come as an eventuality. Now, the other thing I would add is there are so many unknowns. Like, who could have known COVID would have happened? Could you have simulated it as a founder?
No.
And there's so many businesses that have died like off the back of that random act of God. So in my mind, I'm just like, there are so many uncertainties to building a business. And I think that...
And that's where being adaptable is so important. Even with this AI wave that we're currently facing. Yeah. Things are moving so quickly. And so if you're not adaptable, you don't have the ability to really, change the way you're so fixated on one idea. Yeah. You can find yourself in a really difficult position.
Also, your idea is an initial thesis to the market. Like, just stay a bit flexible. And it's so funny because these, I guess things, they seem to be only expressed in the context of venture, but there's some first principles underneath it. Like, you're probably a little right, but you're also probably a little wrong. Someone was asking me recently, like a founder was speaking to on a call, and was like, what's the number one mistake you've seen, like with a founding team? And there's others that are more obvious, but the one that I thought to share was just like, I said, stop projecting on the market. Stop projecting what you think
because
the market
you just
wants.
Don't know. That's why speed of getting something out and quickly getting feedback,
open-minded,
exactly,
because
is so important.
Also like get feedback and interpret it in the context of the lens of what you want to hear. It's like the mom test. It's like, oh, do you think it's nice?
Yeah,
I guess.
it's great.
Oh, they thought we just had a founder feedback call. Like a customer, it was incredible. I was like, no, they were like, yeah, if you say it's nice, I agree. And then because of that, you project too much on the market and you believe what you want to believe. And ultimately the signs were there that it was probably not the best way to think about it. And the truth is, you're probably a little right. But you're probably a little wrong too. So I think like that's the one thing that I think is interesting. You can have this solid thesis to the market and the market can just be like, nope, you're a little right there, but like that's not it. That's actually not it.
I think just on that point, the best entrepreneurs I've worked with get things shipped out quickly and get feedback and just continuously iterate. So important.
Yeah, start learning. It's the only way.
Yeah,
I think even more so now because things are noisy.
Yeah,
like everywhere's noisy. Everyone's building. Customers have high standards.
Absolutely.
So the more you anchor on them, the better for you, because like you could actually there was one time I said something, I was like, yes, you could actually even have initial customer like market pull and you might not be a sustainable company.
Yeah. I mean, we have companies that reach scale of multi-millions in revenue and they just die.
Go bust. Yeah. And I'm
happens.
like, so it's like, so even if you think that, oh, the market pull is like the thing that, you know, insulates you from everything, it's like, no, it's also the type of market pull. Is this sustainable?
Time in, so many factors play into it.
You could always like pump money into something, or you could always like, you know, hack something together that gets people to react in the short term, but it's not sustainable in the long term. So yeah, anyways, I just really think that, the initial thesis is often just a suggestion. The market will let you know.
So taking it back to Octopus.
Yeah. So yes, that is true. Went on a tangent there. So on the Octopus bit, so yeah. So I saw the role and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I would love to learn more about this. And I remember at the time, someone had connected me to somebody who was connected to Octopus. And I was like, hey, I'd had an initial call with the person. And I was like, hey, I just saw this role and I think it's very interesting. So the irony was that it wasn't even so much like, initially it wasn't so much as like a job because I was kind of fine in that area. And then, but it was more like pre-seed in Europe. At that time, there were pre-seed funds, but I didn't see many being spun up. Like at the time, they were either set up or I didn't know about them. So to me, the process of building was very appealing as opposed to investing. You don't find that in, you know, those types of opportunities. And then I remember asking him and I was like, maybe this was a mistake. I remember asking and I was like, what do you think? I saw this role. I thought it was really interesting. My background, there's quite some fit. Me being an operator, what do you think about my fit for the role? And the TLDR was like, I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't think you fit. Like, I don't think you have enough experience. I think they're looking for people with like, you know, lots of experience with investing and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Thank you for that. Could you please connect me anyway? I would just love to talk to the team. So I then, at the time, got connected to the person who had been building the Octopus First Check Fund before I joined, Kirsten. So she had joined, I think, about a year before. And we had a chat and we got on instantly. Like, we just got on. We were talking about stuff. I was sharing my experiences while I was at Hustle Fund. I was sharing my experiences while I was at Oxford Seed Fund. I was telling her how I thought about 0 to 1. I was sharing about my experiences building, you know, a tech startup before as the GM. And she was like, hey, we have a role open. Do you know about it? Like, might be interesting. I was like, oh, it'd be interesting to kind of learn more and chat. And then we chatted, and the more we chatted, the more excited I got about the opportunity. And I think it's also kind of a testament, I guess, to, because Octopus Ventures is quite a large fund. So for a large fund to be able to start with a new fund that kind of looks early, I think it's a testament to the ability for a large fund to reinvent itself, to kind of go where others might not tread or see a market opportunity. So I quite respected that as an organization, because my experience today has then been startup. So it's like, am I going back to corporate life?
Right.
But it was completely different because within the fund, it was like a fund within a larger fund. So there was a lot of autonomy. There was a lot of like, would I say like that startup building feel. So Kirsten and I got on, and then we decided, and she was like, you know what? There was an offer, we chatted, and then I joined Octopus, and we built out the first check fund. Octopus had anchored $1 million, we raised 9.
So you were involved in terms of like building out that fund from scratch, fundraising.
Yeah. I remember the first few weeks just like designing the deck, kind of getting the strategy right, thinking about portfolio construction, and then also then fundraising.
And I think this is really interesting because what a lot of people don't realize is when you run a fund, you are essentially, it's almost like working at a startup, right?
Because it's a lot.
You're building it from scratch. You're thinking about strategy. You're having to go out and fundraise. And so there are a lot of parallels.
Yeah, there are. And I think one of the benefits of doing that, at least the first time within a fund, is that an established fund is that you have the support of like a larger platform team. So you're not doing it entirely like alone. A lot of the ops of all of that was figured out by the team. We had to figure out like the fundraising. We had to figure out the portfolio construction, fund strategy, that kind of stuff. But then also we had to build the ops, because I think Octopus had never had a pre-seed fund that had such a volume. I had seen that at Hustle Fund. I'd seen that. So I knew that we were going to have tons of volume. So we built, pretty much stitched the process together. I'm still a bit of a tech nerd, so I still stitch processes together. I love low-code tools. I still play with things to just make sure they're efficient. So we built that. And it was a great experience, like backing founders, first checking pan-European founders and building a fund. It's not you don't get that experience every day. Until today, I'm still grateful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how long were you at Octopus?
2 years.
2 years. And then you decided to start Openseed.
Yeah, I decided to start Openseed. Oh my God, someone asked me recently and they were like, oh, what is it like starting Openseed? And I'm like, I don't mean to be morbid, but it's like chewing glass. I'm like starting.
Oh gosh.
I know, it is graphic, but it's the one way. It is hard. It is rewarding because you pick your heart, and I will pick this hard 1,000 times over. I will chew glass. It's fine because this is what I want, and this is what I believe needs to exist.
But what made you decide to take the leap and start your own fund?
It's the most insane thing. I think it's a combination of a few things. First, I just thought it could be better. I just thought that there was a nuance that I could bring that was very unique to my background as both an operator and investor. That's the first part. Then the second part, I saw a market opportunity. The pre-seed landscape was getting increasingly fragmented, but it wasn't obvious because the naming nomenclature hadn't changed. So you had at the angel stage, you have angels, you have VC funds. VC funds were needing more and more traction before they moved.
Right.
The difficult venture climate was making it longer to fundraise. And then you had this room of builders build. And irrespective. So they are solving different. In fact, it's even more enticing to the best builders because the problems are knottier. They have more, impact and potential economic, like financial reward. So in my mind, I was like, the builders who are going to build, experienced operators who've built, who were in the headspace of me like 4 years ago. And they're going to identify really large problems. And they're not going to have capital. And it's not just capital, they're also not going to have a network of actual operators that support them. So that was the thesis of Openseed, and we're essentially first investors in a specific founder profile, experienced operators, people who have domain expertise, who've built products and teams at tech companies. They understand high growth, they have strong talent networks, they're tackling large technological problems that technology can solve. So we invest up to 150K, and alongside that, we bring an operator network, so a global operator network of software engineers, of product managers, of people who've done go-to-market at global companies, people and talent, and they are there to support you from 0 to 1. Very specifically, we don't really believe in drawn-out programs. We believe that at the earliest stages, I like to say this to founders, I said it to myself when I was fundraising, you're statistically dead. If over 90-something% of startups fail, or over 90-something% of funds don't get to first close, you are racing. You're fighting for your life. You're looking for market pull so that you stay alive, because
that's a great way to put it.
You're dead, and that creates an urgency.
Yeah.
And with urgency, there's a value of time. So in my mind, I'm like, the best thing that you can offer a founder alongside capital is actual expertise. If you're on your code base and you're going through like a blocker, a software engineer will do a code review with you. If you're recruiting a back-end engineer, and you've done your recruitment, you've gotten to the last 3 candidates, someone who's recruited thousands of engineers will speak to all 3 of them and give you feedback. If you want product feedback from a product, they will get on a 30-minute call and give you actual feedback that you can trust because they've done it before. So that was the thinking. We're still very early days. The other thing that made me believe that this was a potential was in the US, you have almost 50% of funds are led by operators.
Yeah.
In Europe, it's 8%. There are not that many operator-led funds. And I really think that we're
Why do you think that's the case?
I don't know. Maybe I think it's changing. There was a report by Excel a while back, I think last year, that kind of showed that you're seeing a lot of, would I say, alumni from large tech companies begin to start their own. So it's a pipeline thing. The more tech startups we have, the more we're going to have this. I also just have this thesis that, broadly speaking, we're going to see entrepreneurship become a thing people tackle, like they chase deliberately. It's kind of how right now you're an operator and then you think about becoming a founder. I actually think that there are people who are going to start off building businesses, like entrepreneurship as a career. And they might operate for a bit and they will go into businesses and trying to build. It's going to become much more and more mainstream as we go. So there's that as well. So that's why I thought it had to be built. And then there was also another, like, because I've had to lean, everyone has their source. I've had to lean a lot on my faith in this journey because it was existential for me. In my mind, I was like, I need to build something that is meaningful, that has impact. I also like to make money. So yeah, I don't shy from that. So that's impactful, but then also has the returns that comes from it. And also matches who I am, my background, my experiences, the lessons I've learned. And I definitely had to lean and anchor into my faith. And in my mind, I was like, some people were like, oh, this is a very crude way to think about it. But if you think of your life as a bell curve in terms of your age or like your energy, I'm right in the middle of it. Like, and I'm like, I want to build something that is meaningful, but then also is impactful, but then also moves the needle. It has not just impactful just in terms of like the good that it does in the world, which is critical, but then also impactful in terms of the value it creates, both economical and financial, and to the founders that we back, because they're going to be solving really painful problems. So to me, it was not a question of whether or not I built it, was that I couldn't afford not to. The opportunity cost was way too high. I knew I never want to be one of those people who, like, later in their life, are just fixated on this period in their life where they could have done something and they didn't do it. So to me, it was like, you have to do this now. And it's like, you're going to chew glass. Yeah, well, let's get to it.
It's all good.
Let's get to it.
Keep chewing that glass.
Let's get to chewing. So yeah, that's how I thought about it.
And you cover both Europe and Africa with the fund. And it's quite unique.
Yeah.
I guess like something that we both share in common is that, I've covered Europe and Africa as well. And you almost have to wear two hats, right?
Yeah.
So just curious, in setting out to raise the fund, why did you set out to do both Europe and Africa? Because it's something that may not be clearly understood to some, but, given your experience in both Europe and Africa, would love to hear a bit more about why you felt that you had that conviction to set out to do both markets.
It was a combination of the market opportunity and my background and the fact that I could see where that was coming. So the in the US, you already have, it's quite saturated. Your strategy needs to be very specific. The entire idea of backing experienced operators is not new in the US. There are many funds who've done that. I think that the opportunity exists within Europe and Africa on two fronts. One, the operator thesis works across both markets. Both markets are going off the cusp of creating that pipeline of experienced operators who are looking to solve global problems. That's the first one. And then the second one, I think, is, so within Openseed, we look across the future of commerce, work, and health. And I think that if you look at businesses, they're not as digitized as we think. We project a lot of our digitization of consumers and tech companies on businesses, like, in general. There's still a lot of tech. Many businesses are still running on legacy old tech. And our thesis is that there's going to be a combination of teams that understand those markets and understand tech and can unlock value there. Two, we're off the back of a platform shift with AI. This is what the web did to information, 25 years ago? So or even more, 30 even. So in my mind, I'm like, we are going to see a platform shift, and they're going to be builders who are going to build across both, because AI is not, unique to America, or Europe is competing in terms of the
Right,
AI
yeah.
talent and its ability to kind of churn high quality talent and insights. And I think that we're going to see implications of this technology change how we behave, how businesses do commerce, how we do our work in terms of human capital. And I'll touch on that on the Africa piece a little bit, and our digital health off the back of COVID, and a bit more digital tools that are helping us live a better quality and higher length of life. So that's what I think. Then I think that if you think of the Africa side, there is a change in demographic, like globally. There's declining birth rates across the world. The world's going to look very different in the next 10 to 20 years in
So
terms
different.
of human capital and talent. You have a continent that's the last billion consumers, and you have falling smartphone prices, rising internet penetration, median age, off the back of a platform shift like AI. Think of the implication on literacy, on digital literacy, on the almost like the traveling of quality talent,
Right.
that now has a global platform off the back of AI. So in my mind, it's waiting to happen. Then you also have the nuance of immigration, especially off the back of falling median ages, like across. You have aging populations in most places, so you're having a lot of immigration of really strong talent locally on the continent, going across the world, building strong talents and building competencies and expertise as they go, and they're going to solve problems that somehow impact the continent. So that's the rationale there. And we think that it's the perfect time. It's a horrible time to be raising a fund. Horrible, because no one is partying with money. Exactly. And also it's just like very hard. The public markets are not looking good.
Yeah.
The impact on the private markets are making capital allocators squirm. But ironically, it's the best time to be having a fund, investing very early. So long as you have like a diversified portfolio strategy, a very clear strategy that allows the ability for you to spot outliers and back them earlier than I guess the market is able to. So that's the thinking there. I really think that we are in a similar time to what the internet was many, many years ago. And the platform shift is going to change consumer behavior. It's going to change businesses and how we do commerce. It's going to change how we do work. It's going to change how we think about our health. And that's what we're...
Yeah, and I'm totally with you on that one. It's just a really exciting time.
It is.
I want to get personal now.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that your husband went with you to
Yeah.
Oxford. You did the MBA together.
Yeah.
And I can imagine building a fund is not easy at all.
Wow.
And having a support system is so, so key. A thing that one of my friends always says is your partner will be your greatest asset or your greatest liability. And so I wanted to just understand from your perspective, how important has it been having that support system as you set out on this journey to raise this fund?
Oh my God. I am just going to try to, so that we don't spend 5 hours here. Because when you're trying to build something, you are in many different phases that change very quickly. You start with the phase where you're like, okay, I want to do this thing. And then it becomes conviction. And then you're like, okay, I have to do this thing.
Right.
Then it becomes action. It's like, okay, I guess I'm doing this thing. And then it becomes, there's this graph where they talk about like when you start an adventure, that there's a valley of despair. And then you're like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And then you're like, oh shit, we've done this thing. And then you're like, oh my God, did I do this thing? And then you're going through a very, I don't even know what the word is. It's like you're just going through many different things at the same time, all the while having to do the thing and doing it well, because there you are making claim that you can do it, and you decided to do it. So go do it. I would say that the two things that have been the most important things are, one, my conviction. And I mentioned faith earlier. I can't separate it. That's how I find my anchor. That's how I find clarity. I still have a session every week where I just block out the noise and I focus on what I'm trying to build. And I focus on the kind of impact I want in the world. Something that does good in the world. Something that also makes me money, because I don't demonize money. I'm like, that's not, no, we don't do that here. Something that also creates impact, allows people to achieve their dreams and build things that the world needs. So the conviction was important, because even when it got very hard, I knew that I didn't have a choice. I was like, well, I guess it's hard. I guess we get through it. Not so much
choose your hard, like
exactly.
You said earlier.
It's just choose it. It's like, this is my hard. Okay, cool. We do this. It's what the season is asking for. You give it. And ironically, the reason why I think the only other, would I say heuristic, because I self-studied to be a chartered accountant for like 8 years. And this is while being working at Uber, a branch. Like I was busy, but I had this thing that I had decided to do. And I had no accounting background. I didn't even go to classes because classes didn't work for me. Like I needed to learn at my own pace. I'm very unique. My learning style is very different. And doing that and just having to do that and I've gone through difficult things in my life where I know it's what the season is asking for. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, then it being hard is a feature, not a bug. Like, in fact, for our thesis, it's important that it's hard because it's hard that there's this gap in this fragmentation, and then you have builders who are building, and your capital goes a long way. So we just need to serve that. The way I saw it was like, you just need to go through it. The only way is through. So I would say the conviction is there, and then my support system. My husband is a huge part of that. He heard, like, from when this was a ruminating thought to an earworm to a serious thing, he was there and he supported me through it. It's one of the things that I think really helps when people around you affirm what you're doing, and you say, oh, I want to do this thing. And they say, yeah, I think you can. I mean, you have. And he's also a very considered person.
Right.
So he will tell you the truth. So when he says, I think you can do it, I'm like, okay.
And if he didn't, then he would just tell you straight.
Exactly. He'll be like,
Maria, I don't know about this one.
So I was like, okay, that's saying a lot. So that also helps. And then I have my family, my dad, my sisters, and my friends, my close circle. These are people that when things are tough, I will text, I will talk to. So I think that's support. And it's not even just support system, just like vocally. My husband is an LP in the fund. My friends are LPs in the fund. So people are actually like putting their money where their mouth is and showing that they're supporting you. And then I also have an incredible group of advisors. So that's what I would say, with Openseed, I'm a solo GP to start. But everyone keeps, like, I think like people think when you hear solo GP, you have like a thing in your head of like one person running the show. I have an army around me, like, of
takes
people.
A village, like you always say.
I'm not even joking. Like, there are people who will come, give you something, advice, connect you with people. I can't even count the number of people who've come through of things that they just thought would be helpful and they sent my way. So also on the fund, we have incredible advisors. Full Circle, Elizabeth Yin is an advisor. Charles Hudson is an advisor. He's a solo GP as well. I think he's on his fund 5 now. I've gotten a huge critical support system where it's insights on how to think about things that at the time I'm thinking about them. I'm guessing from experienced GPs, where it's like just emotional.
It's important though, right?
It's like, don't mind them. That was a no, but it's a good no for you. Like, it's better than maybe that doesn't materialize. So just having that support system, I think, is everything. I don't think I would have done it without that. And ironically, the work has just begun. It's day 0. It's not even day 1. It's day 0.
I love that. And tell me, so is there such a thing as balance? Like in this initial phase? Well, there goes your answer.
Sorry, I was laughing in my head. I was like, balance, finish your question.
Is there truly such a thing as balance in this world that we're in?
I think like it depends on the phase that you're in. To me, it's just ridiculous to expect balance when you're trying to build something. It's obsessive. It consumes me. That's all I talk about. That's all I think about. And I know that for me to disconnect, I disconnect every now and then to make sure that it's not too, I just make sure I don't burn out. I will read or try to do something where I forget for a minute that I run a fund. But it is all consuming, especially when you're doing something that's meaningful to you. It will take, that's all I talk about.
But you love it.
I can't imagine anything else. Even when it's difficult, I'm like, what a privilege.
Yeah.
What a privilege to be able to decide and say you want to do this, and you're able to, even though it's hard, it's your hard. And it's something that you can do every day, and you're like, yes.
And you're proud of it.
Yeah. I am like, yes, I would choose this. I speak with founders every day. I empathize with the headspace that they're in, because I'm literally
you're going through it yourself. Chewing your glass.
We're chewing glass together. Buffet of glass. I'm like, I get it. And I actually also believe in the raw spirit of entrepreneurship and venture capital and what it was originally designed to do. It is literally a leap of faith. It is looking at someone and saying, I believe in your version of the world that you have shared with me. I believe that there's something about you, who you are fundamentally, that gives you an edge to building this thing. And though it's not clear, I will go all in because I know that there's alpha to be gotten at the other side of the table. Think of any story we know today. They didn't exist, and all of a sudden they became such a crucial part of our lives. It is a leap.
Yeah.
It is belief. So there's something about venture capital in its entirety that honors the spirit of entrepreneurship, that in a sense is somewhat democratized. Is that if I can find a problem big enough, difficult enough,
you
that
can
is
change the world.
I can change the world through that. So, I mean, there's definitely ways in between those 2 points. Between your idea and changing the world. Not many people make it, but
when you do,
the initial thesis still remains true. So I really get a lot of energy from that.
Yeah,
that energizes me. I want to back incredible founders. I love the ambition. I'm curious. Sometimes I'm speaking with founders and I'm like, that is incredible. Like, I can see what you're saying. I can see the world that you're envisioning, and I can see how we might not see today, but all the trends support it. So yeah, I would say that this is the heart that I've picked. And I'm privileged to be able to actually do it because the data is hard. Like, if you see the data, not many people get to do it. So to me, I'm like, this is incredible that I get to do it. And I hope I become the first of many people to also do it, that we have an industry where no matter what you look like, no matter who you are, if you have a vision and you have the skills and you have the experience to be able to execute on it, nothing stops you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Maria.
Of course.
Before we wrap up, I'm going to have to do time machine with you.
Okay.
So if you were not building the fund as you are today, what would you be doing?
Oh, that's a good question. I was about to respond to something that was adjacent to building a fund, but I'm like, I need to not do that. That would be cheating. If I wasn't building a fund, I think I'd be a writer.
Okay.
I actually do, because I'm just as reflective as I am expressive. And I really think that, because there's sometimes I read books, fiction, nonfiction, and I'm like, here I am in this moment, connecting with a person I probably will never meet. And I'm hearing their thoughts, their innermost thoughts, their experiences transfixed and expressed into words that impresses on me and potentially changes how I view the world. I think that's magic. And I think that I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
I tend to have a lot to say, so I would probably be a writer.
And if we could go back to when you started out, right before you started out Uber, actually, what would you tell your young Maria?
Oh, what would I tell young Maria? Keep going. You're doing better than you think you are.
I love that.
Yeah, that's what I'll tell her, because I had a lot of anxieties that I wasn't doing enough.
Yeah.
Like, with everything you have going on, you're doing better than you think you are.
I love that. Thank you very much.
Thank
you
was so
fun.
much. No, this was fun. It was much more fun than I was like, oh, I feel like I've talked about, like, to my therapist. Oh my God. I feel like I've like born my soul out. But yeah, it was really lovely.
Thank you. I love filming this with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of The Startup Leap, TSL for short. Leave a review. Tell us what you think of this episode on all our platforms at The Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guest. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.